virtual folks, they asked us to use this. I think I have a booming voice, so please accept my apologies. Hi, virtual. Welcome. My name is Dr. Carla Bryant. I just told Alyssa I rarely use it, but I'm going to use it today only because I'm going to tell you a story later on about it. Not yet. We are happy to be here just to make sure we're all in the same space, in the right space. You are in the session for critical equity questions as we expand inclusion. Right? Great. And even though we're going to be talking about the early ed space, the birth to 5 years of age, a lot of what when we talk about, especially the legislative piece, that's about that. But I just want you to ponder what that looks like as you think about all of your systems. Inclusion. And over here, I have my wonderful partner in crime, Alyssa, who is from a community organization called Corrigan, who did extensive work around the legislation around the inclusion information that we're going to share. So I'm going to go ahead and pivot to Alyssa so we can get started.
Thanks, Carla. Oh, grab that from you. Well, thank you all for being here. We're excited to talk with you about some work that we've been doing and with a work group, which I will pull up on the screen. And really the goal of this work group and what we want to do with you today is practicing kind of how to have these conversations about, okay, these are the new policies or these are the proposed policies. What is that really going to look like in implementation? What is that going to look like for kids? And does that get us to what our vision is for inclusive programs and classrooms, and really making sure that systems are set up for every child to thrive. And so this group that you see here on this screen is not an official work group. It's just a group of people with kind of a shared goal that came together originally in February of this year to provide recommendations around the proposed changes for inclusion policy in the governor's budget. And so the main things that we kind of talked about is what does it look like to, have a requirement when it comes to inclusion in place, a minimum amount of children with special needs that are required to be in programs in California State Preschool programs. What does that look like? What support is needed alongside with that to make sure it's going to work well? So that was really our focus as a group. And we still meet. We meet about monthly and kind of share what we're all doing, provide updates to one another, just to make sure that we're kind of rowing in the same direction to collaborate, share ideas, give each other new language to use, kind of whatever is just most pressing at the moment is kind of what we're tackling as a group. So we want to give credit to everyone on this screen for the work that we're sharing, because it was really co-created with all of them. So one of the first things we did as a work group was kind of do some foundation setting and making sure we're really all on the same page in terms of how we define inclusion and also how we define equity within inclusion. And so not assuming that we all have the same understanding of that, and trying to kind of get really specific about what we believe that looks like. And so we answered this question as a group, which is, what is your definition of equity for children of all races, ethnicities, and abilities in the context of efforts to expand inclusion in preschool? And we have kind of our answer as part of a full definition of inclusion that we came together kind of aligned on as a group. So before I bring up kind of what we came up with, what our answer to this question is, we'd love to have you all spend maybe 3 to 5 minutes answering this for yourself, what your definition is. And then we'll have a few people, if you're willing, maybe 2-3 people, share out what you wrote. So maybe about 5 minutes if you have a computer or paper and a pen, however works for you to take some time to think and write out what your definition is. And if you have any questions, clarifying questions that I can answer first, I'm happy to do that. Okay? welcome. Grab a seat anywhere. We're just spending some time. Folks are spending a few minutes writing down their answers to this question up on the screen. Yeah, so take your time getting settled.
Okay.
When I was younger, I could do my name.
Well, if you know A and L. Yeah, see, you got like two of the letters. A and L, C are.
Love it.
Wow.
Okay. Give you about 30 more seconds to finish up your thought. Looks like most people are ready. All right, so do we have anyone who's willing to share out what they wrote for your definition before we share ours? Yeah, thank you. Here, do you mind if I give you this?
I kind of was like writing as I was thinking, so let me see if I can make it make sense. I have resources, materials, equipment, physical and emotional settings, teaching styles, and learning content provided for each and every student based on their needs.
Anyone else?
We just wrote down a couple words because we're all sporting tired right now, but we said belonging, it being authentic, being part of community, and needs are met and strengths are celebrated.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? The final person wanting to share out. All right. Well, thank you for sharing those. I think, fine sentiments of what you both shared, and I'm sure what everyone wrote reflected in what we came up with. And I will read it out what's on the screen. So I'll read it first and then I'll comment. But we have equity within inclusion efforts is an active commitment among all adults and systems to anti-bias, anti-racist, and anti-ableist learning environments that ensure access, participation, and support for children that face discrimination and practices of exclusion because of race, ethnicity, disability status, socioeconomic status, gender, and any other aspect of background or identity. So it's a bit of a mouthful, definitely a run-on sentence, but we felt kind of every part of that was very important to say explicitly and name, and was kind of the foundation for a lot of the conversations we had and where our work led us. And Carla may share some of her thoughts on this definition as well, but any comments or questions or just, any thoughts on what we came up with? Absolutely. It can't be just a statement that you write and don't come back to and don't use. And I think there's a whole discussion we can have on what active means and what that looks like. But I think that inclusion of that phrase can get developed with. Anyone else? Yeah.
I think adding the word curriculum in there is really interesting and hearing how a lot of these other sections, a lot of the stuff comes from the systems that were created with a certain intent by people who were not really considering everybody everything.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was really important to us too, thinking about, like, you have to think of the top level system, and then the next system down, and then the program, and then the classroom, and then the family and the child. And so looking at every single level was also, yeah, a huge part of what we talked about, so thank you. Anyone else?
I think the word socioeconomic, the socioeconomic side is problematic. In terms of inclusion in C as compared to health, wellness, or preschool program, because we systemically exclude those of mid to high income families. We prioritize just low income. We give priority to low income students. So, I mean, if it's inclusion, it should include everyone from all socioeconomic staff.
I think it's a real, in the early education system at large, I feel like it's a huge thing that we confront, developed this system by necessity, I think, that has all these different silos and sections to it. And so when we're talking about something like inclusion, what does that look like in a system that has some children over here and some children over here, systems that aren't necessarily set up to effectively collaborate with one another. So I think it's an important point, for sure. Thank you. Other thoughts? I think Carla's going to say a little bit too here about the phrase disability status.
We spend a lot of energy talking about, let me back up. As we think, as we think about how we exclude individuals, I will tell you that systems take on personalities, and the exclusion starts to occur based on a particular set of types of children. African American, the misbehaving kids. And then all of a sudden the system wraps itself around this set of statuses, these labels that mean something to the system, so they can then start to do certain things to wink, wink, accommodate. Accommodate who? Adults, the children. And when we give these labels, they can mean anything. It's almost like, what is OHI now? That child with that label, it could be so much. So the status and how our perceptions of it actually is how the system makes its moves around how they're going to support or not support that child. So for us, this conversation was just a real deep conversation about just what you were talking about, the different levels. It's about the reasons we give for why we do what we do. I don't know about you, but I still struggle with what inclusion means. I struggle with it, and this is when I said to you, I would tell you sort of this quick thing about, I'm a parent with a child that has needs. And finding a space that includes my child in an appropriate way has been a struggle. But as a person who's responsible for creating systems to accommodate children, to reconcile the disconnect with the system, moving itself to exclude. This is something I think we should struggle with constantly. This is a terminology that as we are moved and pushed and legislated to include, that we think that we don't always have the answer. Let's just keep going back to what we think it is. And there's only one way to really think about it, and that's through the eyes of the children and the families. they'll let us know what they think it is, but I am proud of this group because we struggled with this term, appropriately so. And I hope we continue to struggle with it because all it will do is make us investigate what these systems do, that we create.
Thank you, Carla. Great, so we're gonna move on from this definition, but we can, make, I think what Carla just shared, what you all said is gonna come up again in, other questions we're gonna ask in the rest of the presentation. So, we'll definitely come back to these ideas and kind of struggle with them together. We first want to review, just on a high level, and people may know all of this, some of this may be new, but just what has changed in terms of the state level policies for state preschool and inclusion. And so this is what we're focused on as a group. We're focused on California state preschool programs, but that said, I think if that's not your area, it's still obviously going to be relevant and the discussion will still be very, very relevant. And this is in the context, obviously, of a larger UPK system that is being built, and like what we were talking about before, where we really need to think about every single part of that system, how it is connected, what does inclusion look like in each type of program, how are we finding alignment between those different parts of the system and models, and making sure that children can access the same opportunities regardless of where they are exactly. So just very quickly to run through these. The first is that there's now going to be a requirement for CSPP programs to serve a minimum of 10% of children with exceptional needs, and exceptional needs I'll kind of go over in a second how that's defined in statute by 2024. So this year it's 5% of their overall contract. So it's not by classroom, I believe it's on a contract level, program level. And then in July 1st, 2023 it will bump up to 7.5%, and then July 1st, 2024 bumps up to 10%. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but that is actually a big ramp up for programs, just depending on where you are with it, right? Everyone's at a different place with that. And we won't go too much into where this came from because we can't say because we didn't make the policy, but this is the Head Start kind of framework, or that the policy for how they do inclusion. So we imagine that it played into it. The other thing to say, and kind of related to that, the adjustment factor for children with exceptional needs was increased to 2.4, which is almost double what it previously was. So programs will receive a good deal more funding for a child with exceptional needs, which is a huge positive, obviously, can be used to really support not only hope the needs of that specific child, but also inclusion as a model in the classroom. And with that 10%, or the 5%, then 7.5, 10%, programs will receive funding for that amount of their enrollment with that 2.4 adjustment factor, regardless of exactly what their enrollment looks like at a given point in time in the year. Which is also a really positive thing because that would be very confusing, I think, to implement if it worked that way, but also helps programs be able to count on kind of a set amount of funding that they can maybe think of as like funding they can use for inclusion or for things related to making an environment that is more supportive for children with exceptional needs. The change in definition was that there's a phrase that used to be in statute that is something, this isn't going to be word for word what it is, but something to the degree of like a child that requires the special attention or care of an adult in a child care setting. That phrase was removed, so it now is a child with an IFSP or an IEP. That is, by definition, that would be a child with exceptional needs, and therefore kind of these policies would apply. The other things to mention are that children with exceptional needs, again by that definition, are categorically eligible for CSPP, which is again a very positive, good thing. And then there's also kind of increased funding and some like additional parts added to the Inclusive Early Education Expansion Program. And that is, and folks here might be more familiar with it than I am, but LEAs can apply for grant funding for that, for professional development, training, support for inclusion. Again, that's a great thing, and we obviously support that. One of the questions that we had, and we can talk about this more later, is if it's something that is a grant and an LEA can apply, maybe a single, like a community-based organization in that district, maybe they're connected with their district, maybe they're not. How do they then get access to that training, to that professional development? So what does that look like across the state? How evenly, with that setup, how evenly will that be applied? Will every teacher be able to access it? Will it benefit every child? So it's a question we have that, again, going to that systems level, what is it going to look like on a systems level to make sure that as we are increasing the amount of children with exceptional needs in programs, that it is a given, and ideally before that ramp up happens, it's a given that teachers, directors, everyone, all the adults will be given the support, the training, the ongoing coaching that they need to feel successful and to be successful for children. So that's kind of a big thing that we talked about as a group and continue to talk about. And the last thing I'll mention here is that there's also, Hidingo actually co-sponsored legislation that was signed by the governor that further prohibits suspension and expulsion in CSPP and also promotes the model of early childhood mental health consultation. And it's relevant here to say that there's kind of a move, I think, across different policies that have passed to keep kids in programs and to make sure that programs are not excluding children for any reason at any time, unless it is truly best for the child that they are in a different spot. And so this is, I think, a huge deal and a really amazing kind of step. And so again, it makes us really excited and also really laser focused on the implementation, on what that looks like to make sure that that it is done well, so that children really do benefit. And Carla is going to bring us kind of into that part of the discussion.
So initial response to this opportunity.
My initial response? Okay, the 10% eligibility, who decides who's eligible? Who decides? For example, I taught in, I'm an early childhood special education teacher, hired through the school district, and we have an inclusion collaboration with the Head Start. So for the past 6 years, I've been working as a co-teacher in the Head Start classroom. My salary, my other reaction is equity in pay. My salary is paid through the school district. So equity of pay with the gen ed teachers. So there's a great, fabulous collaboration that we have. Co-teacher, gen ed teacher, and special ed teacher. If this is an increase of 2.4, but this was one classroom. This is one classroom in the entire school district. I look, there are not that many in Contra Costa of positions like this. I've been teaching for 7 years, that we've had a co-teaching relationship where the special ed teacher is working alongside in the Head Start classroom with the gen ed teacher. So what I envision, what that tells me is that, are we going to bombard the gen ed teachers with special ed kids, with children? Who is going to provide the service? What's the service delivery model? So the student, because also in our classroom, I have 12 kids who have already identified disabilities and co-enrolled into the Head Start classroom. Well, beginning at 6 in the morning and 6 in the afternoon, we actually started with 8, and I had an assistant, and 4 in the afternoon, and I didn't have an assistant. And that class that had 8 kids, I said, you know what? All these new kids come in and they've never been identified, and we're sending referrals for them. And so now it ends up being a reverse mainstream, because the proportion of kids who have needs, is greater than the kids who are quote unquote the typical kids. And breathe. Yeah. And some of it is the 10% eligibility, who determines it?
Yes.
Service delivery, who is providing the
Yes.
service? And thirdly, equity in pay, if we're doing a co-teaching model,
Yes.
then having some kind of a little bit, like with Head Start hierarchy, because
Yes.
Head Start doesn't pay their teachers what I get paid as a special ed teacher.
Right.
And Head Start doesn't pay their gen ed teachers what they should be paid.
Right. Wow. She actually brought forth, I think, a lot of issues about the system. And we will tell you, and we're very careful with this, is that our conversation was around capacity. We are real clear, the system is going to need help with capacity. And we're seeing capacity building at all levels, to your point. The systems level on how does this design look? How does it look in collaboration with the community? So think about who your presenters are. We have Alyssa here, who's with Cadango, who is the largest early ed provider in Northern California, in the Bay Area. And you have me, who worked for a urban district for multiple years, and now I work with the University of Washington, operating a center that works with leaders who are responsible for this kind of work. We are here together because we know that this is a collaboration between community and the district. Just that word alone, collaboration between the community and the district, requires some capacity building, some relationship building. To think through how do they create a system that will actually appropriately, equitably serve our children and families. So there's a lot of unknown answers, but I will tell you that there will be guidance that will come down from CDE, as well as you know, this is all parallel, there will be certain districts out there who will be in front of this, who are going to lead on this discussion, who we will lean into to ask, that we will use to inform other people. That's part of our work as well. But you're asking the kinds of questions that should be asked. There is an equitable conversation about who's doing the work where. There is a conversation about how do we appropriately work with children, support children who have not been identified, who will be in those classrooms. So you're asking the right questions.
Guidance has already come down in California, everybody who qualifies for the 10%. They've got to have an active IEP.
Yes.
If they have an active IEP, they qualify for CSPP within the 10% RSVP. The 2.4 reimbursement factor is so that the classroom can cut its ratio by half. Because one exceptional needs child is equivalent to two uniquely developing children. It's 1.4 more
Right.
than what you'll get. It's
But-
double.
But I want you to ponder something. And I use this word, I don't want to use the word equal. All children are not the same. So this is where the design is so important. This is where, and this design has to be lockstep with general ed. This cannot be designed off to the side, people with just special ed. This design is about what is the appropriate placement of children. I will tell you, in San Francisco, we played with the numbers. We would say to ourselves, and this goes back to the conversation about all disabilities are not the same. We had conversations that the support needed for this particular child was a lot. So we would only have one child in there, and we would reduce our ratios down, and we did this. We were, instead of having a 1 to 8, where we had 24 kids in the classroom, we had classrooms where we had only 16 kids, but we maintained the 3 adults. Because we understood that the supports necessary were different, and we costed out all of these models. We also developed a model where we did this behavioral mental health model, where the resources, we used that factor, the monies, to actually create a whole nother program. I'm gonna say this again, this is an opportunity. There is no one answer for one organization. This is going to require gen ed, special ed, and the community to come together, look at your data, look at the children that you are serving, to figure out the best way to to advantage this opportunity. One more, and then we're gonna, because we have some questions that are gonna provoke some of these same conversations. I saw a hand go up.
Okay, so I'm a behavior support program assistant through the Inclusive Early Education Center for my son. And, I can relate to everything that's being said, and I can add that one of the barriers that we're facing is, even when there is that collaboration, special ed methods and strategies are clashing with Head Start and state preschool policy standards, child writing. So that wanting to work together is there, the wanting to provide inclusivity is there, but then it's like, oh, I can't do that. And, licensing came in and saw that, we would be in big trouble. So I think that's kind of like where we're looking at the different systems that we're saying before, because what's in place is not working, and it's not moving together well, because the methods are different and policies are different.
And I'm gonna say to you, I know that. But there are, people have figured it out. How many of you are parenting a child with some other person other than you? Do you agree on everything? It takes, that's a relationship. It takes a minute to come to an agreement. So I'm gonna say, stick with it, don't abandon it. Because guess what? A portion of your children will stay in that Head Start setting. And if the system doesn't come to an agreement, all of those children, or a high percentage of them, will end up in the district. And you guys have different methodologies. That's not fair to the children and families. So you have to just work through it. And I know there are places where they are working through it.
Yes.
Yes.
So thankfully I've heard a lot of stories, and I'm like, okay, when I talk to her after.
Yes.
I'm like, how do you do it? Give me your email.
So let's do this, let's move forward, and there's 3 questions we just want you to ponder. And they lead, everything you shared absolutely leads into these questions. So we're gonna go straight to the next question. This is just a summary of the questions, but we're gonna go right to them. So what's the first question? The new policies both mandate and incentivize inclusion. Now think about that, they mandate and incentivize. Isn't that kind of I don't know, this is kind of interesting. In what ways is this positive, and in what ways could there be unintended consequences, and you've already named some, to this strategy? And by the way, which children are going to benefit, and that's just something for you to think about. Which children will benefit and who could be left behind? I've already heard middle class families could be left behind. But I want you to just take a few minutes, and for individuals who are not sitting at tables with others, if you could join one more table with someone who's sitting alone, and really ponder this. And the reason why we want you to ponder this is that we're going to use what you say to us, and we're going to go back to our group and say, this was raised. These are issues that were brought up that we didn't think about. So take 2 to 3 minutes in a group. 2 to 3 minutes. Include yourself with someone.
I'm noting down everything.
Yes. I love this. We're back to the capacity again. People are on the hell.
Yeah, it's real stuff. It's so different when you talk about it up here and then you hear
And
about
we
it.
could have rolled out with something. And they just gave the money to someone.
Yeah.
They could start planning this right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can really build it in a way that's going to be most effective. for
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
But you guys are thinking that you're going to work with Head Start, or do y'all have separate Head Start rooms?
Head Start is part of Cadango. I think this is
Right.
the thing that's so different about Cadango. Number one, we have like economies of scale. We're big. Like you're big, you have more resources. to drop one from, but then we also have, Head Start is where they go, early Head Start, behavior intervention team, like all of that is part of,
But you're figuring it out.
we're figuring it out.
And that's, they need models.
Yeah.
See what charting on what they can provide, what's the easiest path to get to 10%. So is there going to be any kind of guideline or legislation in place to ensure that they're upping their game rather than just
So we want to have them share out, and then and then we can I'll pop up the things that we have, and then
One more minute.
they inevitably come to
we could also. I don't think we have any virtual
She's gonna let
comments,
me know,
but
she's gonna
really
give me a
don't.
little sign.
Oh, nice. Wow, what a good system. What a good system.
We worked it out. And thank you for letting me figure out my daughter.
Oh, of course, of course.
Before we schedule, and then after we schedule, she has to go to the doctor. So we were like,
You're like, how are we gonna, make it all work? Yep.
10 seconds.
well, we used to work out our music hour. We had all.
There's the alarm.
Oh, that's right.
You'll pull him back.
Time. If I could just have one or two people who have not shared, provide, some of the answers that you came up with.
We can also.
How is this positive, and in what ways could this have unintended consequences? Ideas.
One of the ways it's positive is obviously increased access, increased identification for families who may be keeping their kids out of programs for whatever reason, right? Making sure the resources are all in one space. The unintended consequence still comes back to that 10%. How do you get to that 10%? Are there criteria to avoid cherry picking based on what services you can provide? That's always the question that comes up. Will there be guidance in place to keep that from happening, as does happen in some of our charter programs and some of our districts for that matter? So.
Ooh, okay. Someone else.
I really concur with what he said, because I'm just thinking of concrete examples where we have a state preschool who will say, oh, we're already doing that because we have children with speech IEPs. So in the sense, they're following the letter of the law. And then I always think about the wondrous California lottery, will those funds come in and then it's a bait and switch. Okay, you got money over here, so then we would have given people who's elsewhere. So, that's a district, districts do that. So I just think those are some of the unintended consequences that I agree with cherry picking is huge.
Huge. And then there will be questions about who is really most qualified to serve certain. We're talking about, when I say, we take on personalities. One more comment.
I'm talking about, we're serving, I'm a youth coordinator, we're serving an agency that feeds into lots of different school districts. And so there are so many that are not getting access to the special ed services because it's connected with an LAA, their home school, in a lot of cases, or they get referred by VMRC, the regional center, and then the they're going to be their kids, you know, when they go to CA.
And that's the bottom
Why
line.
wouldn't you
Yes.
wanna find these kids and serve them, rather than, oh, sorry, you know, there's a little bit of that.
So quick, in the back, do we have anything from our, comments from Jen? You guys, this is what we came up with, and you've added more. Positives, make inclusion the standard of practice, that's great. Inclusion becomes the norm. Increase funding to support the individual needs of children. Possible unintended consequences. The over-identification of children, particularly children of color, to meet required percentages. Will people be pushed to make up 10%? To make sure that they get that extra factor? I don't know. Lack of true inclusion in terms of disability type. A lot of speech, all disability status, and will we start to see that only certain programs take certain kids? Training and PD does not seem to be guaranteed for all programs as they enroll as an increased number of children with disabilities. Will we build capacity for the gen ed staff and the special ed staff? Okay, next question. And remember, these are just questions to ponder as you roll out your program. What are the processes and practices at the program and classroom level that can help ensure successful implementation of new state policies that expand inclusion? What's in place that we can leverage and lean on? Because there is some good work out there. What are they? How do we ensure equitable, anti-bias, anti-racist, and anti-ableist practices as we expand inclusion? And then we're just going to add this one just as a thought. If you couldn't accommodate a child's need, or if you know others who felt that way, what were the reasons? What were the reasons why we didn't accommodate someone? So as you think about what's in place, also keep in your head, what are we doing that actually is counter to this? I can't serve that child because so think about both of them in your head at the same time. There are some great practices out there, but there's also some very clear things that we're doing already in our systems that we need to raise up and stop. We need to acknowledge that they're happening, and I'll give you one. You look up in some places and you see the same kids, different name, only in certain spaces. You're misbehaving African American kids, boys. They're the ones who are being suspended because this is not a good fit. That show up one day in my friend's program. What are we doing? Are we actually moving kids in that direction? But take 2 or 3 minutes and ponder this. First question, what are the processes and practice at the program that we should raise up? That we want to make sure that we don't lose those. At the same time, you know we're doing things where we're pointing kids in certain directions. Am I allowed to say we need to consider unions? I'm just saying. Can I say that? I'm on tape. Okay. 2 minutes.
What did they hold on? What did they hold on?
heading into question 3. At a certain time, give me a tip.
Okay. Nice. Great. So yeah, if we started in like 3 minutes, we should be good. Because there's nothing after that. Yeah, cool.
Support mentors. Those are like the things that you can not really that's the kind of person I do it for. That might help make sure that's the implementation. But really the only thing that's changing is the intersection of whether you see the intersection training and curriculum, which I know they're doing programs. So there's some good ones.
Carla, I think too, the point we can make at the end is, just that like, what we were saying, it was today or yesterday, but that like this is a conversation you can have with your teams, with like, you can take the presentation, walk them through the same question.
That's right. 10 seconds. Last word. So rapid, are you?
Okay. Say it.
That's right.
So let's popcorn the first part of the question. What are practices and processes we want to keep that we need to lean into and leverage? Are there any obvious ones that come to mind? Just real quick, just popcorn. Oh, keep those where we're not expelling children. Love it. Others. What is that? Oh, the professional learning communities. Yes. Yes. Others.
On that line, we're doing
Communities
communities in practice.
in practice. So important. We got to bring more people in. We got to bring families into this conversation. We have to. Other practices.
Continuing inclusion and collaboration, quarterly, and bring together all stakeholders in the family.
Yes. Love it.
I was gonna say an increase in real-time in-class mentoring and support. Because we can talk about a lot of things in a room with each other, but people need to see it in action. So if you don't have a mentor or somebody who knows what it looks like already, go in and show people who are unfamiliar with this how to do it, then they're going to read it, get into class, freeze up, and write the whole thing off.
Got it. Oh, I love that. I love it. One more.
If I could just share my position with the EAT grant, that's actually exactly what we do. So we're able to give real-time support and feedback to teachers in the moment who are working with children with variabilities and challenging behavior. And they are so appreciative, and they say it's so refreshing to not have someone from the outside telling you what to do, how to do it. They leave and come back 2 weeks later, and we're there with them throughout the day, and they say thank you for being the teacher with us. It is so helpful.
So what I'm hearing is embedded. This is embedded. This is where it is built into your system that is almost part of the class. Okay. Real quick, some things that you think we just need to let it go. It's okay if you don't have one. It's okay. So let's read the processes and practices that we know that we raised up that we want to keep. Structures developed that create a program-wide buy-in to a cultural inclusion. Inclusion is not just a classroom. It's a behavior, it's a belief. Consistent training. Support staff and professional development. This is something you embed in the process. Oh, just a minute, I'll get back to you. I'm so sorry, I didn't see. All staff shares equal responsibility for inclusion. Did you hear that? All staff. This is not Sped's issue and so-and-so's issue. Real quick.
Things that need to change?
Oh. No, give me one.
Attitudes and lingo, so,
Oh,
like,
okay.
calling it an inclusion program. I have a classroom, I create inclusive environments, I create positive, but I'm not running a program. As a special ed teacher, we need to move away from the medical model of me being a case manager, because that implies that I have a case, which is, and that I'm managing a case, which is burden, and none of my students are burden, so I am the person who schedules IEPs, I'm the person who ensures that the IEP goals are being met, for individual students, but I don't have a case. I have a class list of students, and all of those students have IEPs.
So, I'm so sorry, but we have one more,
Yeah.
and then I'm gonna let you at the end, okay?
No,
It's
no,
you,
sure.
okay? And this is perfect. You have, and can you write it down for us?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, perfect. Now, we're gonna take a picture of it, we're gonna take that with us. And then ensuring equity, facilitated conversation. Mind shift among all of adults. You're hitting on it, and then grounded in the belief of developmentally appropriate practices. If it's one of the things we tell everyone, there are 3 guiding principles for us. DAP is, if you are doing things developmentally appropriate, you're moving to inclusion, because you're gonna modify and accommodate based on the needs of the children. And if you start to do that, you will see equitable systems. You don't go, to your point, you don't say you have a DAP classroom, do you? I got a DAP classroom, it's developmentally appropriate. To your point about, that's how we talk about inclusion. Last question, and we're gonna go through this one quickly, so let me apologize ahead of time. What data can classrooms, programs, and/or researchers collect to understand how well children across disability, race, and ethnicity are served by inclusion models and policies in CSDP? We're gonna do that as a whole group. We're gonna do it as a whole group because we only have 5 minutes. And by the way, you're gonna get these. And
They're available on the app or website.
yes. And Alyssa made a point earlier to me to tell you, I'm gonna make for you now, which is take these questions and take them back to your group as a provocative question, just to start the conversation. So what data?
CSDPs have a family survey.
Yes.
That we give out that has tons of questions at the bottom.
There we go. First one, family feedback. How do families feel? Data on teacher mindsets. This is the one that gets tricky. This is the one we have to be careful about. This is why we have to be in partnership with our unions. This is why we have to say, the data will not be used against you. It will be used to support you. Shift in mindset.
Shadowing a student through their school day.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Experiencing in real time what they experience.
Yes. I would love to see that data on my son. I really would. Data on leader and teacher growth linked to supports provided. Are the supports working? How do we know our supports are working? Enrollment data. Who's enrolling? And I will say go deeper. Who's being assisted in the enrollment process? I'm going to quickly share this with you. I found out in my program when I was, that the enrollment team set up a totally different enrollment process for a particular set of parents. They made sure they gave them extra support on getting all the documentation, but didn't do it with anyone else. And then all of a sudden we had one set of children and we didn't have another. What is that? enrollment data. So researchers, effectiveness of state funding. Is this funding doing what it's supposed to be doing? Are our policies driving where we want to go, or do they have these huge unintended consequences? You know, we need our researchers to look at this. Reasons and scenarios in which children are turned away. This is the exclusion work. This is where we're really worried about those children, because remember, the language changed. It made it very clear. Children with IEPs and IFSPs. We know there's a whole other set of children who do not have this, who are at risk. What happens to those children? And will the system identify them and make sure that they are not, maybe those are children who, if we did the work ahead of time, they won't need an IEP later. This way we'll make sure the children who need it actually get it. Details on race, ethnicity, classifications by classroom each year. That will help the system understand. Is there anything online that anyone wants to offer that we've missed? No? I want to thank you. We want to thank you. This was just a conversation to get it started. There's so much more work to do. This is a great opportunity, but I don't want us to lose the opportunity. I'm going to say to my individuals who are not in the early ed space, this is the time to align your work. To see if the work that we're doing is actually preventing children from going into other systems if we catch them right. Please be willing to think outside the box with the children and the families.
And I would say final thoughts are just, echoing what Carla is saying, ask these questions, keep asking these questions, and also for Cadango, because we are a direct service provider, we are going to be doing this too. And so we are asking these questions now of our programs, and we're going to try to kind of collect our answers now, track it, have that data, and kind of dig deeper and hopefully do some kind of internal research. And so please reach out too. If you're doing this work, we want to connect kind of across the field with others, because we'll be much stronger if we can collect the data we all have to really put that picture together, as Carla is saying. So please do reach out, stay in touch, and thank you all for being here. Really enjoyed it.